So let's talk about gross margins and how it actually impacts working with chain stores. Most of the time when you're dealing with a chain store, the problem is that there's pricing involved and the cost of goods sold and so forth involved. There's a lot going on with regards to the price of your product and also how much revenue you want to make and how much revenue the retailer wants to make. So we're going to explain gross margin simply and how it impacts you with chain stores. So hopefully you get a feel for how this all comes together. Gross margin basically is the total revenue that you've received of your product minus total cost of goods sold, which is the cost of the products, everything related to costs, to equal the total revenue. So gross margin basically is the total revenue of your product minus all the costs associated with it. And there's two ways to look at it. One way is on the vendor side, meaning your side, and then there's one on the retailer side. So on the vendor side, basically, when you're trying to figure out how much money you're going to make on a per unit basis and so forth, you're just literally figuring out how much money you've made on the product minus all the costs. That's pretty simple. But let's talk about how that impacts a retail chain and working with them and so forth, because they have specific requirements and expectations. And all of this can impact whether or not you get a chance to order or not. So first of all, it's really good if you know the retailer's gross margin expectations, because not only are you trying to make money, they're also trying to make money, right? So a retailer like Walmart is a low price leader, right? But then there is other retailers that are like Neiman Marcus or whatever, they have a lot of wiggle room. Every retailer is different with their expectations. Walmart's going to kill you on price, almost dead. And Neiman Marcus is not. They're going to do other things, and they're still going to try and get a great price, but it's not live or die situation, right? But Walmart buys more quantities. Part of all this is just figuring out with retail chain you want to sell to, what they can afford, what you can afford. And that's what this is all about. So when you're dealing with gross margins in regards to the chain store's perspective, it's that they have expectations based on the retailer individually, because again, it depends on the type of retailer, but also the product category. So for instance, if you're selling a fashion accessory that costs penny on the dollar, they basically are going to think about your product very differently in regards to how they make money with your product versus whether or not your product's a big, hefty appliance like a washing machine or something like that. The buyers for different product categories care about different things. So with that said, you need to figure out what an ideal gross margin is for a retailer based on your product category. That would make your life a lot easier. So when you create a price for your product, you know what their expectation is, how much revenue they're expecting to make and so forth. How do you figure that out? Simple formula is to go to your local trade association for your product category. So you can go to Google and type in toy association, and you'll find that there's an association related to every product category. So it's a trade association. So there's also consumer electronics associations and so forth. So to figure out the specific retailer's margin requirements for your product category, an easy way to do it is to go join one of these associations. All these guys are already selling to the retailers that you want to sell to, selling the categories and so forth. Just to ask questions, what's a typical ideal margin for our product category? That's the easiest way to figure out what you're doing in regards to ideal pricing, what they're looking for, and so forth. That's a way to do it. So that's how gross margins also relate to the chain store's perspective. The other thing is when you're dealing with volume discounts and negotiations with chain stores from their perspective, they're looking for sometimes a great deal if they buy a lot of quantity from you. And that impacts the gross margins, the revenue they want to make. And with that said, it's something to consider. Go to your manufacturer who is making your product and find out what's the discount they can get if they buy 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 units of your product. That will actually be a very nice negotiation tactic, and that will be helpful in regards to getting you to the buyer's ideal gross margin. So in other words, if your pricing is pretty high and you can talk to your manufacturer to get a better price if they buy a lot of quantity, that's a discussion point, and that helps you. Another way this impacts your relationship with a chain store is your cost of goods sold, obviously. Basically, however much money it costs for you to do packaging, your producing of the product and so forth. If you can find a better manufacturer, a cheaper one, I should say, or cheaper packaging or cheaper this or cheaper, that brings your price down. And obviously that enables your buyer to have a better gross margin. And also you, right? So if you can get that price down, that helps everybody. You have to factor in shipping and distribution costs. When you work with a chain store, you also have to ship and transport these products to either a distribution center or other ways. And so the key here is if you can get the price down or you can get the buyer to actually pay for shipping in that negotiation, that impacts your gross margin, right? How much revenue you're going to make. And it also impacts the retailer if they're making you pay for it. That means that you have to calculate that in there. I hope this makes sense. Another way that it impacts you in retail chains in regards to your gross margin is private label versus branded products. With a chain store, there's a couple ways you can sell to them. One way is through private label, which is, let's use Safeway grocery stores as an example. They have Safeway Select products on their store shelves, or they have branded products of people's products that have been branded, their packaging and so forth. So if you are selling to them private label, that's one buyer, right? That buyer cares about repackaging your product under their brand name. That means that they're selling your product probably at a cheaper deal because Safeway Select products are usually cheaper than branded products. The reason that impacts you is that it'll impact the pricing strategy because obviously private label products are going to be cheaper. And so again, that means they're buying more quantity, but it will affect your gross margin and also the relationship with the retailer, right? Because you are now having to sell to them a way cheaper price. So that will impact your gross margin. However, if you sell a branded product to a chain store, you can usually keep your pricing where you need it to be a little bit better because it's under your brand name. And ultimately, that is a business decision, how you sell to a chain store. And I have other training videos on private label versus branded products in our Retail MBA YouTube channel and our retailmba.com blogs. But the ultimate reality is all these things impact your gross margins and the retailers as well, which is ultimately your total revenue minus cost of goods sold. So the other thing is you're dealing with inventory management. Maybe if you're shipping and you're overstocking or understocking, it can impact or affect your gross margin or the chain store's gross margin as well. Promotions and markdowns, if you're working with a retailer, basically sometimes they ask for promotions to be able to get more people to buy your product, to attract customers. That will impact your gross margin. The other thing is like stuff like slotting fees and cooperative advertising. That's going to impact your gross margin, meaning obviously, if you're paying out to be able to put your product in a very specific place on the store shelves, at chain stores, sometimes they charge you for that. It's going to impact your gross margin. And there's so many other ways that this can be impacted, but I wanted to explain gross margin so that you can have a better relationship with these chain stores. You don't have to panic on all these, but just be aware that if you hear this term, now you know what it is. Hopefully I've tortured you enough to you can understand how it impacts with chain stores. And we find that if you know what's going on with these retailers, you have a better relationship with them long term. And so working with the associations, understanding your particular category and so forth will make it such a better relationship with the retailers, because sometimes you may not go after the low price leader because you know you can't get your margins down and so forth, or get an ideal gross margin when you work with that particular retailer, and then you pick other retailers that are better for you. This is Karen Waksman, Retail MBA. I hope this helped. Please be on the lookout for additional videos we create. Please subscribe and take a look at what we do. Retail MBA started out as a training and coaching system that's helped people make millions and millions of dollars across the globe selling into the world's largest retailers. And we also have events, done for you services, many things in regards to making money with a retailer. Karen Waksman, Retail MBA. I hope this helped. Thanks so much.